Jim Collison, we're live again at Heartland Developer Conference 2017. I think we're in our 4th year of doing webcasts out here, a little bonus content. I'm here with Dave Crawford from Microsoft. Dave, welcome to the Heartland Developer Conference.
Thanks for having me.
You were the session keynote this morning, Thursday morning, first keynote, big deal.
Yes.
Congratulations on it. How did it go?
I think it went well. There was... my humor sometimes stops people, but I think I got a couple of chuckles. So
well, and you have that accent. Where are you from originally?
I'm from England. In fact, you're a Game of Thrones watcher?
No. I should be, though. Okay. I might be the only guy on the planet.
I think you might be.
Probably.
It's the new I'm vegan, isn't it? I've not seen Game of Thrones. Yeah. So I'm from the north of England. I'm from a place called York.
Okay.
And it's basically not Westeros, Winterfell, if you watch Game of Thrones.
Sure.
So yeah, I have my accent. That's where I'm from.
It's great. Yeah. No, it for whatever reason, Americans love the British accent. I think they think it's smarter. And I think we're going to find out today.
Well, I hope it is.
Dave, it probably is.
I don't think I'm necessarily going to tick all those boxes.
You'll do fine. Or people will have Game of Thrones flashbacks as they're hearing you do this. Hey, let's get to know you a little bit. Give us just a little bit of your bio, your background with Microsoft, what you do for them.
Sure. So I've been at Microsoft now for almost 10 years. I spent the first 6 years of that in the UK in Microsoft Consulting Services, which is the professional services arm of the company. And during that time, I worked with all kinds of companies, big and small, and in all kinds of different industries, and helping them from a UX and design perspective get on board with Microsoft technologies and solve the problems that they have. And a few years just before I moved to the US, so it's probably around about, I don't know, 2010 or something like that, a small group of us pitched this piece of work internally to help the marketing team launch Windows Phone. And we kind of ran our little team like a startup where money was coming from the Windows marketing team. And we grew it into a service where any major app that was coming through the review system, if it was from a major partner across the world, like the Contact in Russia or Sina Weibo in China or Facebook in the US, they'll come through our team for quality reviews. So they come through for a technical review and a UX review, and to help them out and respond with that kind of stuff. And that kind of evolved into a service where we actually start to build and design a lot of the flagship apps on Windows and Windows Phone. So I'm very lucky to have worked with like building Spotify and Facebook and PayPal and big names like that, which I wouldn't really get to do at many other places.
Yeah.
So although I am a Microsoft employee, and I have been for a very long time, I don't actually build Microsoft products. I build other people's products.
Yeah, the ecosystem apps, right? The apps that get people in those. Windows Phone, of course, has not been the launch that we were hoping for, but a lot of things have moved on with Windows 10 and kind of the universal system that's coming out. How's that coming internally? I mean, so what are you doing now? And I know Microsoft's making a big emphasis on the store in Windows 10 as we think of Windows 10 S coming. We're trying to keep things in the store. How's that going?
I'm good. I've recently switched focus now that I'm in Windows. So now I work a lot with flagship apps coming to the platform. So apps like Adobe XD, which is a full UWP app, which has been brought over which has been dealt actually from scratch for Windows. And I don't know if you're aware of iTunes coming to
I heard that.
So it's actually my project.
I heard that. Yeah, that and Chrome, I think, are what need to come before we can really be there. Yeah, Chrome will be hard.
Chrome will be hard, but that Apple project is, I've been running that project for about a year and a bit now. I'm very lucky to have a fantastic team who I work with. So I focus on those.
Will that get optimized? Today, the iTunes app on Windows is a pretty terrible experience. The x86 app. In this process of rewriting it for the store, will it get better, just a little more efficient? Maybe will you guys be able to do some UX, UI stuff to make it better?
As you may be aware,
did I just
these are
ask
difficult
you a question?
questions? Apple are very good at what they do, and as you know, they are quite secretive about what they do.
Sure.
I don't actually know.
Fair enough.
The improvements they're making. All I know is that they are
good. Well, it's good to see it's coming. It's good to see it's coming. It's tough to have a store without iTunes.
Totally,
and so good to hear it's coming. What else?
So I also work a lot with new devices. So as we have new devices coming through our development testing process, I partner with our device teams to find partners who have great experiences that would gel well with the new devices that we're making. So for example, for Surface Studio and Surface Dial, I worked with a bunch of different partners on bringing their experiences for launch. So Moho, for example, is a great professional grade animation package. So working with those guys and seeing how we can build new UI and how we can build these new experiences into their existing pro level app was fascinating. And this is something I do on an ongoing basis with new devices that come down the line. Unfortunately, I can't talk too much about new devices.
Sure.
But yeah, I also get to build some apps of my own every now and then. My team is responsible for the Windows section of the build Keynote, so we actually build the demos and write the scripts for our execs. So that's fun as well, getting to go on stage. Well, seeing your work on stage at least.
Before we started talking, you're kind of a self-professed gadget guy.
Yes.
And so, of course, in the last couple of years, Microsoft's gotten very into gadgets, which has been great, right? You mentioned the studio and the dial.
Yeah.
Do you get to interact with those? So as part of your job, do you get to interact with the hardware as much? So
well, that's the thing.
Good for you,
with new
right?
devices, you have to. So it's we have a process that I don't know how much I'm showing that I shouldn't be showing here, but we have a process called tenting, which is getting brought into like the secret new upcoming projects. I'm very lucky that I actually get to get tented on stuff relatively early. So yeah, with the Surface Studio, for example, I mean, I still have a prototype on my desk that I still use. I don't get a production one, but I have this really cool prototype, and it's fun to work with it. And also being a creative professional, having something like the studio and the dial with great pen support as well makes my workflow so much faster. And I can really am genuine when I talk to other designers about the effects it can have on your workflow, because I've lived through them myself.
And do you get a chance to use the Surface Studio very often, or is it a part of your regular workflow?
It's so I use it whenever I do any creative work. It depends, but my work kind of oscillates between program management work and creative work. So for the creative work, it takes up a significant part of my workflow for that. But for the PM work, obviously, it's not an essential piece of technology for that, but it's something that I like to use whenever I can. I mean, I have a Surface Book and a studio, so I'm kind of spoiled. So,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd love to put one in my podcasting studio. I think Surface Studio. I'm not sure I can justify the expense.
It is so beautiful.
It is great piece of hardware. Great piece of hardware. On Home Gadget Geeks, we spent some time talking about augmented, virtual, and reality devices. And of course, you don't have to say anything secret. There's a bunch of them, HoloLens, and then there's a bunch of new devices coming out by other vendors as well as Microsoft. Have you gotten much in the mixed reality space? Have you gotten a chance to work in there?
So I've been involved in HoloLens for a long time, actually, but mainly with other partners. But recently, I've started to skill myself up on AR and MR kind of experiences. So we actually have a dedicated team within my department who focus on MR and VR with third parties. I'm trying to skill myself up in just asset creation right now. So I'm going through the motions of learning Maya, which is not easy. It's very powerful, but it's not an easy thing to learn. But I'm trying to learn how to do that so that I can better support the people that I work with, and also for demos or for work with partners. So I can be like, well, here's how you build these assets that work well on MR devices or that kind of thing.
Well, and I've loved to see the price point come down. So we're pushing down price points a little bit
with the new headsets that are coming out, starting at $399, and the thing I love, sorry, I'm a little bit of a promo right now.
That's great.
The thing I love about these headsets is that they are world tracking. So you're not restricted to having things on sticks and camera setups, and you can put them on in any room and it will scan the room just like HoloLens does. It's the same technologies that power HoloLens. And I'm just super excited that they're below $500, which is crazy.
So our last Home Gadget Geeks, we interviewed Dwayne Robinson. He is he's on the car. He's on the auto team there, right? They're the embedded vehicle, right? That's what they're doing. And we went through kind of the VR setups, and he showed the headsets. We also spent a lot of time talking about video cards required to do this. And the other thing that's coming down is the minimum specs are coming down, it seems like. So the average consumer, if they're going to develop, that's going to be one thing. But I think we're seeing a nice drop in video cards. Of course, video cards are now competing. Mixed reality is competing with Bitcoin for high-end, right? Have you gotten bitten by the Bitcoin rage that's going on right now at all?
So I kind of wish I had been bitten like a year ago.
When
Bitcoin was
you and me both. Cheaper. We did Home Gadget Geek shows like 2 years ago, and it was like $200, and they told me at the time to buy it, and I didn't, and it's $847, something like that today.
It's crazy.
Pretty ridiculous.
I would love to get involved with Bitcoin, or with my friend's a massive fan of Ethereum. He was trying to get. I think I've missed that now because he was literally telling me about it like 2 weeks before the massive bubble appeared, and it's like, damn it.
Well, it's okay though. I think we're just in the early stages. There's always these moments, right? There was a huge run up in Bitcoin too. It went at first, and then it pulled back, and it's kind of in a bubble now. And you think of Litecoin and Ethereum. But there's a whole bunch of different altcoins out there, and there's some interesting things being done with the blockchain.
Do you know, I was actually reading something, or might have even been on the NPR podcast I was listening to the other day. There's something with the instability that's happening with North Korea. Traditionally, investors put money into the yen, but because Japan is so close to all this instability that's happening in the DPRK, they're actually putting it into blockchain currencies, which is, I mean, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I still have
I still have difficulty reconciling the fact that it's not a gold standard backed.
Right.
So I know it's not essential anymore.
And it's never been a part. It has not been a part of the U.S. We have not been gold backed for a long time. And and I'm not. I'm never going to make $1 million off Bitcoin, but it's an interesting. I think the blockchain concept is the most interesting. And when you think about the technology and then the hardware, especially when we're talking about mixed reality now, with those coming down, and the computer really getting to a spot where I think the average consumer can now afford to be in. Now, you mentioned the mixed reality headset that's coming, and I think this is a key point. I don't think people know the sensors. I think because some of the Connect work is built into the headset.
Yeah, just like HoloLens.
I never knew with Oculus Rift you had to have these sensors put throughout the room, right?
And you have to like set them up and calibrate them and stuff. And like with these headset-based tracking systems, you can just in any place you're in, you can just put it on. It's fine. You can take it to a friend's house, plug it into their machine, and it will just work with no setup. Yeah. Obviously, assuming it's a VR-capable PC, but the prices are coming down when people are getting them. I
was able to get NVIDIA 1060 VR ready. I think that's really important that people know that. Make sure if you're buying a new card, it needs to be VR ready for that. Yep. A whole bunch of HDMI ports, so you could plug multiple pieces in. USB is going to be important too on the PCs. But that minimum requirement of that 3 gig on the card and a 1060. 225 for the card, not too bad. The high-end cards are going in the 500s and 600s because of mining right now, to be honest with you. And so I think it's coming down. What are you seeing? You're in that space. When we talk about the practical, HoloLens has been kind of a gimmick a little bit. It's kind of worked in some areas and not. You're seeing something, not asking you to disclose anything, but how do you feel about mixed reality for the future? And are you starting to see some real practical applications coming that may make its way into the enterprise?
So with HoloLens in particular, we're currently targeting enterprise. It's still a reference design, all that kind of stuff. I think that there are certain applications of VR and MR technologies that appeal more to different segments, whether it's to consumer or whether it's enterprise or everything in between. Price point's obviously clearly a factor, but also practical use. I mean, with HoloLens, you do need a decent amount of space to move around in because these are world-based holograms that it produces, and I'm sure you're familiar. I guess you've used one a few times. So, like, if you're trying to play Minecraft in your living room, for example, you need to have the space for it really, so that Minecraft can appear on your table and on your floor and that kind of stuff. The great thing about VR is it's all self-enclosed, and you move around just virtually. You can run it in the smallest spaces. I think we're going to see. This is my personal opinion, but I think we're going to see VR catch on much more in the consumer space initially. I think MR is going to still be in the realm of enterprise until the price point comes down, until experience gets more improved. I mean, we saw Google making similar inroads with Google Glass. I mean, it never really caught on for social reasons as well with Glass, as I'm sure you're well aware. But they recently released an update of the hardware for enterprise. I mean, I think that AR still makes more sense in enterprise space. I think that consumers need a gentle introduction to AR because AR it's a different way of interacting compared to VR. So once people get used to having VR in the comfort of their own room and interacting virtually with people and with virtual objects, I think introducing MR and blending these two realities will be a little bit easier.
Yeah, you mentioned the social aspect of it not catching on, and what about the UI aspect of it? Yeah, that's your specialty. Yeah, and a lot of what you're thinking about. Where do you think we need to go from a UI to make it even better? And what are you hoping? Again, not disclosing anything, but what are you hoping that we'll get to make that better?
Well, this is an area that genuinely fascinates me. I mean, if you think about how UI and UX has evolved, like it's grown up really in 2D interfaces. I mean, UX is very much its infancy and command line stuff. It didn't really exist, and then as a practice, it's got much stronger over the past 20 years with the two-dimensional interfaces. But it now means that the 3D space is still much of a Wild West. There's still gold to be won. There's still standards to set, and accolades to achieve. And for me, it's coming up with a consistent set of navigating virtual environments is going to be paramount to its success. I mean, already we have so many different controller styles. Well, I say so many, we have like 3 or 4 right now, but whether it's actual handheld virtual controllers that you can see, like Oculus have, or HDC have, or we have with our motion controllers, or whether it's just keyboard and mouse or Xbox controller base. So there's already so many different ways of interacting with this. To a degree, it's great. I mean, we want to have as many entry points as possible, so as many people can use it with whatever hardware they have and whatever entry point. But there's going to be a crucial, like, not influx, a pivot point where one technology will take the lead. And I think we're still trying to find what that is. We're still trying to define not just the hardware that we need to interact with, but also the visual cues and the things that make sense, because we're messing with people's perception of the real world. I mean, we're literally messing with what they see and what their brain interprets and what they hear and stuff. There's so many things we have to work out, and there's a lot of research. I know that Microsoft invests a significant amount of research into MR and VR and the human factors aspect of it. So there's some names to be made, and there's also some standards to set, and it's an exciting time to be in it.
It is. I think we have a lot of work to do there. What about Cortana coming into that space and being helpful? Have you seen anything where we're beginning to do more voice, where I don't have to necessarily use my hands or use a controller? Are we seeing anything like that yet?
I think that's, well, we've seen a massive proliferation recently of voice assistants in our daily lives. Things like Siri, for example, or Google Assistant maybe might not get as much activation on phones and wearables as the manufacturers would like. However, when it comes to standalone devices that sit in your home, like Google Home or the Cortana speaker that's being produced by Harman Kardon, or obviously the Echo range of devices, we are very comfortable just talking to something in thin air. I think that we're going to see more of that happening in the VR space and the MR space. For example, right now, a significant amount of interactions you can do with HoloLens by using air tapping with your hands, you can actually do with Cortana. It still responds to Hey Cortana. Everything gets activated that way. But we're still trying to figure out what people are comfortable issuing voice commands to do, because in many interfaces, still voice commands are slower than actually just doing it yourself. Until it gets to the point where voice assistant can take a more complex language and more complex queries, which are faster than doing things manually. So there's that aspect to it as well. But probably the major stumbling block to voice interfaces for either 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, non-ambient experiences is that discoverability is a real stumbling block for them. You don't want to have like walls of information that say what you can say to something that you have to scan through anyway, which will only be clicked to type. So, and we don't trust voice assistants yet to just understand enough context or enough unguided commands or things that are out of its kind of range of activation keywords. So I think that we need to trust voice assistants more, but in order for us to trust them more, they need to give us more value first. So I think we've seen some fantastic inroads into that with Cortana and Siri and Echo and Google Assistant, sorry, Alexa and Google Assistant. But they need to be able to do more and be more proactive, and also just be more like talking to a person. We tend to treat them a little bit differently to people, but at the minute we treat them like they're children that don't understand what we're saying half the time. And for them to be helpful to us, they kind
of are children, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
In a lot of ways.
It's kind of up to us to bring them up, I guess.
Yeah. They got a ways to grow. When you think of UX, UI, traditionally we think of that on a screen in a 2-dimensional. We talked about virtual, where now we're 3D. Does is voice UX and UI the same idea? Can you think of it in the same ways about making improvements and what people say, or is that completely different because it's all verbal commands? I don't know if you know, but I'll ask you that question. Are those two different fields of study, or is it the same concept, same ideas, just applied to voice as opposed to what we see?
Well, visual design and UX design are on a bigger spectrum of human-computer interaction, and voice interaction is definitely an aspect of that. It's a significant part of HCI these days. So yeah, it's definitely part of the UX spectrum. If you think about it, people may think that it's because there's no visual UI, then it's a super simple thing to deal with. You know, you say something, it responds to you. But if you think about the times that you've interacted with voice assistants, and they will how you have to phrase things in a very prescriptive way, or how they don't carry context through. There are still many UX considerations you have to take into account here. For example, I can say to Google Assistant, sorry, to Alexa, for example, I can say, what's the weather like in Nebraska today? And she will tell me, but she'll tell me in Fahrenheit. So I'll say, what's that in Celsius? Because I'm obviously, European. And she'll say, I don't understand. Yeah. And it's like, well, I asked you a moment ago, you need to carry context through. Assistants like Google Assistant or Cortana, for example, can carry that context through. So you can say, well, it's in Celsius, and they'll repeat the same thing. But you have to hear that whole thing again. Whereas I don't want to hear the weather today in Seattle is blah, blah, blah. I just want to hear 15 degrees. And just that kind of a level of HCI is something that's is still something that needs to be applied to voice assistants. And there's still a bunch of efforts to understand the amount of information that you need to give, and also the amount of intuition that these assistants have, and how much they can safely assume from a user without them feeling uncomfortable, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always look to Iron Man and Tony Stark, and the assistant Jarvis is, I think, a really good example where it feels like another person who cares.
Yeah.
And who's carrying on a conversation, not just one command after another.
Yeah.
Do you feel like we're getting closer to more context? And I know we have a lot of new stuff coming with Windows 10 and the Fall Creators Update. Cortana is bringing some new features. They're public. We've been testing them in the Insiders program. But do you feel like we're getting better with that, just as kind of on the outside looking?
Yeah. I think that with context in particular, I think that's one of the, I wouldn't say it's necessarily low-hanging fruit, but I'd say it's one of the essential fruit that needs to be, like, I don't really want to extend this metaphor, but like needs to be on the tree. But
right.
It's until we have context, I don't think we can really go much further than that. And it's not just context as in what's the utterances that have been issued to the assistants. It's also the context in, like, I'm in a car, so there's going to be lots of background noise, or like I'm in a car, so my queries are probably going to be related to driving in some way, or I'm at home, so they're probably going to be related to, timers or weather or things like that. So there's so many different aspects that they've yet to solve. I think that, like, the big four, big four in voice assistants at least, so Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and the fourth one that escapes me.
I was thinking through Siri.
That's of course.
That's small company.
That's small voice assistant. Yeah.
Dwayne Johnson is now going to bust through.
The good thing about having 4 competing ecosystems is it's going to drive innovation. And I think that, that's why I have multiple voice assistants. I'm obviously a Microsoft employee, but I have multiple assistants in my home because I want to understand the differences and be able to improve our products. And a lot of that is understanding what other things do well and what they don't do well and what the opportunities are. And
well, and I love the fact that Cortana is going to start working with Alexa in the future. That's just announced. And I think because all 4 of them have really different strengths.
Yes, they do. Yeah. It's funny that, to me, a friend was asking me the other day, like, which do I like better out of the voice assistants? And I say, well, the thing I love about Echo, for example, is it talks to all my home devices. It's super good at doing that. It will order me, like, more cat food, or it'll order me, more tea bags from Amazon, and I can track my orders and stuff. But doing anything else, I have difficulties with it. Whereas I look at Cortana or Google Assistant, and they're so good at giving me information and maintaining context. And Cortana in particular at keeping on top of my schedule and things like that. She is, I'm using she, I'm already,
You've already ascribed human likeness to her.
Yeah. So she's so good at, like, being proactive, like, you need to leave for the airport and things like that. Like, she's got some great proactive things. And Google Assistant is great with, obviously, Google Knowledge Graph at pulling those things together. But having Cortana and Alexa talking to each other, I think is, first of all, I think it's a really smart move. And second of all, I think it's going to be super powerful for consumers because we're going to have all of Cortana's knowledge graph and integration to things like Office and that kind of stuff mixed in with Alexa's ability to talk to my devices and also talk to a retail giant with all those skills that they have. I think it's a really good partnership they have there, and it stops one company from trying to boil the ocean themselves. Each person takes a pail and tries to do a little bit.
Well, we think of that, the presence and the location services that come with Siri and Google. and it knows my movement. You mentioned context. I was before we started, I was telling you that I just started using Azure Media Services to index some audio, and it actually gives me before I kick the index off, it gives me the ability to put in some clues, like, okay, what's this about, and what are some keywords I might want to look for, and what are some unusual things that I might be saying? HoloLens is what the example.
Like you do the stenographer, and you give them some keywords
industry specific. If you're a doctor, it might be words that are hard to spell, and it keeps track of those as it's doing this indexing, so that if it comes across the words it doesn't really understand, it will take hints from that and be able to find them. I think when we think about virtual assistants, I think we're going to have to get to that spot where, like you mentioned, this is what tipped me off to that. I'm in a car. Chances are I'm going to be asking traveling-like questions, gas stations, food, next stop, those kinds of things, emergency services that might relate to the car. By the way, we have all these fitness trackers on us now that can tell us how we're feeling and how we're doing, and if we're struggling sleeping. And, I just think for people who think this is a mature market, I think there's some very, very exciting things ahead.
I mean, these are new technologies to us, just like AR and VR are. I mean, we've had them all around in kind of nascent forms for 10, 15 years. I mean, do you remember Kurzweil Voice or Dragon Dictate and stuff? Like, these technologies have been around, but they're starting to get to a point where I wouldn't say there's maturity, but like they're starting on that path. Like they've grown up from the infants, and they're starting to just kind of grow up a little bit. And the same thing with VR. We've had VR experiences since the 80s, but they've been not great and not accessible. And
and I think the ultimate goal is some things. I think we're still away from being where things can be predictable. It can do the prediction for us. I know we're making some strides in that. Have you done any work or thought any about, when we think about the UX UI world, of self-healing or predictive UX UI, where the experience changes as the consumer's in it based on their habits and what they do, or try to make some predictions about, hey, I know because I have the phone and I got all this information, I know the user likes to do it this way, I'm going to change as we're on the fly. Is that being done anywhere or thought about?
So it is actually an aspect of UX. There's fields of research into that. It's adaptive UX, really. It's literally adapting to the situation they're in. There's also if you boil it back down to before we could have like AI models we could train or paths that users could follow, there was stuff that could be done with statistical analysis, which I know is obviously the backbone to a lot of AI, interfaces anyway, such as, user does this stuff more often, so like surface those results first or surface those options. But when it comes down to the even earlier aspects of it, is around like self-correcting for like error processes. So if users were doing things wrong, then the system will recognize that it's not quite going all according to the plans, so they try and compensate for different things. And there are actually areas of thought that study this stuff. I'm not an expert, unfortunately. It's still very much in its research and kind of development phase right now. I wouldn't say it's to the point where it's being rolled out into anything mainstream. But that said, a lot of it does tie back into voice assistants. I mean, you can now imagine only be able to phrase, what's the traffic like, what's the weather like in one way. It would drive you insane. So we already have this fuzzy logic that's applied to speech recognition. So I think we're going to start to see it more in other avenues of interface. Obviously, there are areas where it's never really going to take off in terms of error correction. Things where you need to be super precise, like architecture or safe critical systems example. But what it could do is have fail safes in there that can be like, oh, you haven't done this, so you need to do this, or like So there's always going to be odd industries that stand out against it. But I think it's something we're going to start to see in the mainstream.
Yeah. Well, like you used that traffic example, and I really want it. Like, traffic's really important to me on my commute. Now, in Omaha, let's be honest, like San Francisco, like Omaha's not any of those when it comes to traffic. But I would love for that assistant to find me wherever. So it sends, hey, I go to work about the same time every day. It can sense where I'm at, when I'm going. When my car starts, it knows I'm going somewhere. It should do everything it can if there's an accident or a slowdown to alert me faster, sooner, to say, I know you normally go this way. You're not going to want to do that. We're going to reroute you this way, and here's why. That's kind of working, but I think we still have a ways to go in that user experience.
Yeah. And there's also there's an element of how much you're willing to surrender over to the machine. For example, if Are you going to blindly follow a rerouting, or are you going to want to know more about it, or are you going to know which roads it's taking you down, or how much extra time it's actually going to be, and are you going to trust that they've taken into account the fact that kids have just started going back to school and things like. There's so many things that we need to trust in the machine before we can actually allow the machine to do that thing for us. It's a fascinating space right now. It's
it's a whole new world. I'm not gonna lie. I grew up in the first PC generation, right? I was those kids that grew up with the very first PCs, and we thought it was great. I think we're in a second or a third wave where we're just scratching the surface now on what these devices can do for us and how cool they can be. So.
I would agree. I think that we're definitely starting, I'd say, the third wave, because we now have digital natives. I'm sure you've heard that bandied around an awful lot, like ad nauseum, but these are kids who are growing up where voice assistants are the norm, smartphones are the norm, VR is going to be the norm. I guess I was the second wave. My first PC I got when I was, I think, 12 years old. Maybe, I think it's about 12, maybe a little bit older or younger. But it was like it was a Pentium 90, and with tiny little
pre-internet, right?
Actually, just at the cusp. So it was 96 when I got my machine.
It's just coming online.
So I had a V34 modem. So my first machine was internet connected. So I don't have any experience of a home computer that doesn't have internet. That's all I've ever known. I mean, at school, obviously, we had 486s, which didn't have internet connections for about 2 or 3 years. But I was like the beginning of that's why I call it the second wave. It's when internet connections became
connected,
the norm.
The connected PC, so to speak.
And then WAP phones and all that kind of stuff.
And it's what an amazing world we live in, Dave. We'll have to have you back on Home Gadget Geeks and talk more about this. But thank you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Hang tight for 1 second. We'll be back. If you're watching on the live page, and there's a few of you who are, we'll start the next video at the next video down. So you'll want to just look down there. All the videos throughout the day are listed there. And we'll close this one up. So we want to thank you for watching. We'll be back with the next video here in about 5 minutes.